On September 6, 2005, 24-year-old Maren Holloway began her first day as a sixth-grade teacher at Alder Creek Middle School in Nicholas County, West Virginia. She had grown up in the region and understood the limits many local families faced. Some students came from homes where money was uncertain, parents worked long shifts, and college felt too distant to consider. Maren had returned because she believed children in small communities deserved teachers who expected something meaningful from them. Room 14 had been prepared with used books, simple learning materials, and red paper apples carrying short messages of encouragement. Maren had paid for some of the supplies herself because the school budget covered little beyond basic needs. She wanted the room to feel dependable. For several of her students, school was the one place where rules were clear and adults were expected to keep their promises. Among the 28 students was 11-year-old Tobin Rusk. Tobin rarely volunteered answers and had learned how to pass through a school day without drawing attention. His family struggled financially, and teachers often described him as capable but withdrawn. During the first day, Maren noticed his interest in a library book about firefighters and emergency rescue crews. She did not embarrass him by making him speak in front of the class. Instead, she treated the interest seriously and connected it to courage, discipline, and service. Tobin remembered that because few adults had ever spoken to him as though his interests could become a future. Maren also had a nervous habit that appeared whenever pressure became difficult to manage. She rubbed her left thumb against the side of her index finger. Her parents, Gideon and Lenora Holloway, had seen it for years before important examinations and unfamiliar situations. Maren rarely noticed it herself. The first school day ended without trouble. Maren remained in room 14 after the students left because she wanted the second morning to feel organized. She completed lesson materials, reviewed student information, and finished arranging the classroom. At approximately 5:35 p.m., she left the school and began the drive toward her rental home. The trip usually took more than 30 minutes and included County Route 12, a rural road with unreliable cellular service. During the drive, Maren encountered an old pickup near a drainage ditch. A girl who appeared to be no older than 8 was beside the road wearing a yellow raincoat. There was no nearby business where the child could ask for help, and no adult was immediately visible. Maren stopped because she believed the child might be in danger. A large man soon appeared and offered an explanation involving the disabled truck. He wanted help reaching a gas station. The details did not seem right. The child did not respond to him with trust, and the situation felt less like a roadside breakdown than something arranged to attract a driver. The girl gave Maren a small warning by moving her head. She did not need to say anything. Maren understood that the man was not her father. She attempted to leave, but another vehicle appeared from a logging access road behind her sedan. Its headlights filled the rear window before it struck the back of her car and blocked the available space. The front of Maren's sedan was trapped near the ditch, and the second vehicle prevented her from reversing safely. The encounter had been planned. The girl had been used as bait because the men expected a compassionate person to stop. Maren had been selected not because she was careless, but because she could not ignore a child who seemed to need help. The storm and the isolated road protected the men from witnesses. Cellular service was too weak for Maren to rely on, and no nearby traffic camera recorded the vehicles. Her sedan remained trapped between the ditch and the second vehicle while the larger man controlled the front of the scene. Maren had spent her first day teaching children that kindness and trust could make a classroom safe. On County Route 12, those same qualities were turned against her. She never reached her rental home that night. The next morning, her students arrived at Alder Creek Middle School expecting to find their new teacher in room 14. Her lesson materials were prepared, the red paper apples remained on the wall, and the plans she had made for the class were waiting. Maren Holloway was not. At 7:10 the next morning, a Nicholas County deputy found Maren Holloway's sedan abandoned along County Route 12. The vehicle sat near the drainage ditch with the driver's door open and the key still in the ignition. Maren's purse remained inside. Her wallet, identification, cash, and bank cards were untouched. A stack of student papers from room 14 was still on the passenger seat. There was no sign of Maren. Gideon and Lenora Holloway had already reported that their daughter had failed to return home. They had called her repeatedly through the night and contacted local hospitals before notifying law enforcement. The discovery of the sedan confirmed that she had not simply changed her plans or stayed with a friend. Something had happened between Alder Creek Middle School and her rental home. Investigator Orson Bellamy was assigned to lead the case. He had worked missing person investigations across rural West Virginia and understood how quickly evidence could disappear on isolated roads. The storm had already damaged the area around the vehicle. Tire marks were unclear, footprints had been washed away, and the shoulder had been disturbed by runoff. The condition of Maren's belongings made robbery unlikely. Her money was still present, and nothing inside the car suggested that someone had searched for valuables. Bellamy believed she had been forced away from the vehicle or threatened into leaving it. Search teams were organized within hours. State troopers, sheriff's deputies, volunteer firefighters, and local residents checked nearby roads, drainage areas, abandoned buildings, and logging paths. Tracking dogs were brought to the scene, but the weather had weakened the scent trail. Maren's photograph was distributed to hospitals, truck stops, gas stations, and law enforcement agencies in surrounding counties. Alder Creek Middle School became part of the investigation. Faculty members confirmed that Maren had stayed after dismissal to prepare for the next day. No one reported seeing a stranger inside the building, and nothing had been taken from her classroom at that time. Her lesson plans were complete, which showed that she expected to return the following morning. Bellamy interviewed the students from room 14 with parents and counselors present. Most remembered the excitement of meeting their new teacher. They spoke about the books, the red paper apples, and the way Maren had treated them seriously from the first hour. Several students also remembered a telephone call near the end of the school day. At approximately 2:20 p.m., the school office transferred an incoming call to room 14. Maren listened for less than a minute and did not explain who had contacted her. The students could not hear the caller, but they noticed that her manner changed afterward. One student remembered Maren rubbing her left thumb against the side of her index finger. Gideon and Lenora identified the movement as a nervous habit. Maren had done it since childhood whenever she felt frightened or overwhelmed. The details suggested that the call had not been routine. Telephone records showed that it came from a public payphone outside a gas station more than 50 miles from Alder Creek. The station had no camera covering the phone, and no employee could identify the caller. The distance made the call more suspicious. Someone had contacted Maren at work while attempting to hide their location. Bellamy then focused on Maren's sedan. During a second examination, a technician found a crumpled yellow sticky note beneath the driver's side floor mat. 5 characters were written in Maren's handwriting. VKR 72. Bellamy believed the sequence was part of a license plate. Maren may have noticed a vehicle following her or parked near the school. She may have written the characters quickly because the same vehicle appeared more than once. The note became the most important piece of evidence in the case. It was sealed inside a clear evidence bag and placed with other materials collected from the sedan. Because several agencies were working at the scene, the evidence was temporarily stored in a cardboard box inside the open trunk of a state police cruiser. The search area remained busy. Officers moved between the road and the command post. Volunteers delivered food, supplies, and equipment. Local officials and members of civic groups offered help. Access had not yet been fully controlled because the investigation had expanded faster than expected. Later that day, the evidence box was transported to the state forensic facility. When an examiner began logging the contents, the bag labeled for the yellow note was empty. The plastic bag was still there. The label was still attached. Only the paper had disappeared. Bellamy ordered an immediate review of everyone who had been near the cruiser. Officers, firefighters, technicians, reporters, and civilian volunteers had all moved through the area. No complete access list existed. Every officer denied removing the note, and no witness admitted seeing anyone reach into the box. The characters had been copied into a field report, but without the original note, the lead was weakened. Investigators could not prove when Maren had written it, where she had seen the vehicle, or whether the sequence had been recorded correctly. Bellamy understood that the disappearance of the note was unlikely to be accidental. Someone had known exactly which item could lead police to a vehicle and had removed only that piece of evidence. That meant the person helping to conceal Maren's abduction had not stayed far from the investigation. Someone connected to the crime had entered the search area, appeared helpful, and stood close enough to the police evidence to protect the people responsible. By the end of the first full day, Bellamy no longer believed the danger existed only on County Route 12. It had already moved inside the search for Maren. On January 8, 2006, 4 months after Maren Holloway disappeared, 25-year-old Sloan Mercer finished an overnight nursing shift at a small hospital in Greenbrier County. She left shortly after sunrise and began driving home alone. Her route was familiar, and she had no reason to believe anyone was following her. Sloan never arrived. Her car was found later that day near a rural service road. The driver's door was closed, her purse remained inside, and there was no evidence of a collision. Her disappearance immediately drew attention because of the similarities to Maren's case. Both women were young, lived in rural West Virginia, and vanished from their vehicles without any clear sign of robbery. Bellamy requested access to the investigation before a formal connection had been established. He did not assume the same offender was responsible, but he believed the circumstances were too unusual to ignore. The missing note from Maren's sedan had left him with no reliable vehicle identification, and the anonymous phone call to room 14 had produced no suspect. Sloan's case offered a new possibility. If she had encountered the same men, there might still be evidence that had not existed in September. For 6 days, investigators found nothing. Then, on January 14th, a truck driver discovered Sloan near a secondary highway. She had no proper winter coat and no shoes suitable for the cold. She was exhausted, dehydrated, and confused, but alive. The driver contacted emergency services and remained with her until an ambulance arrived. At the hospital, physicians limited questioning until Sloan was medically stable. Bellamy understood that immediate pressure could damage both her recovery and the reliability of her memory. When she was ready, interviews were conducted with a trauma specialist present. Sloan could not identify the exact location where she had been held. She remembered being taken from her car and transported for what felt like several hours. She had been confined in a room below ground level or inside a structure with very little natural light. She recalled concrete walls, a metal door, and the smell of cleaning chemicals. Her captor had controlled what she could see. She was not allowed to approach the door when it opened, and she could not determine how many people were involved. She remembered one man more clearly because of his size and voice, but she could not provide enough detail for a facial composite. A second person may have been present during transportation, though she was uncertain. One memory stood out from the rest. At approximately 10:30 each morning, Sloan heard children playing nearby. The sound was regular enough that she began using it to measure time. She heard groups of children outside on weekdays, followed by quieter periods. She believed the noise came from a school playground, a daycare center, or a public recreation area. It did not sound like children living in a private home. That detail changed the search. Investigators reviewed maps of Greenbrier County and neighboring areas, marking schools, daycare centers, churches with weekday programs, and community buildings near isolated farms or abandoned properties. They focused on locations where a hidden room could exist within hearing distance of children without attracting attention. Sloan also remembered that her captor had followed a schedule. Food arrived at predictable times. The room was cleaned with strong chemicals, and she heard a vehicle during certain parts of the day. Bellamy believed the offender was operating from a property he knew well and could enter without appearing suspicious. Search warrants were obtained for several locations connected to men with violent histories, rural property access, or prior complaints involving women. Most searches produced nothing. One location, an abandoned dairy farm, drew greater attention. The farm stood within hearing distance of a small school. Beneath one of the buildings, investigators found a cellar that matched parts of Sloan's description. The walls were concrete, the door was reinforced, and the interior had been recently cleaned. The smell of bleach remained strong. Sloan was not taken back to the location. Instead, Investigators showed her limited photographs after consulting her medical team. She could not confirm that it was the room where she had been held. The structure looked similar, but her memories were incomplete and affected by trauma. Forensic teams processed the cellar carefully. They collected fibers, hair, soil, and residue from the walls and floor. The room had been cleaned so thoroughly that no usable fingerprints or biological evidence connected it to Sloan. No property belonging to her was recovered. The owner claimed the cellar had been used for storage and animal medication. Records showed that several people had access to the farm over the previous year. Without physical evidence or a positive identification, prosecutors could not establish that Sloan had been confined there. The discovery nevertheless confirmed something important. A room matching her description could exist close enough to a school for children to be heard every weekday. The offender did not need to operate in complete isolation. He only needed a place others accepted as ordinary. Sloan's survival brought temporary hope to Gideon and Lenora Holloway. If one abducted woman had escaped, they believed Maren might also still be alive. They asked Bellamy whether the two cases were connected and whether the dairy farm could lead to their daughter. Bellamy could not give them that assurance. Sloan had not seen Maren, and nothing found in the cellar belonged to her. The methods were similar, but similarity was not proof. The Holloways continued waiting. They distributed new flyers, answered calls from strangers, and followed every reported sighting. Some leads came from people who genuinely wanted to help. Others came from attention seekers or individuals hoping for reward money. None brought Maren home. Bellamy kept Sloan's statement in the center of the case file. Her memory of children at 10:30 suggested that the place where she had been held was connected to an ordinary daily routine. It also suggested that whoever abducted her was comfortable living close to families, schools, and people who never suspected what he was capable of doing. The investigation had found a possible room, but not the man who controlled it. For Maren's parents, that distinction meant the difference between hope and an answer. The years after Sloan Mercer's escape produced no arrest and no confirmed location for Maren Holloway. Bellamy continued reviewing the case even after it stopped receiving regular attention from the department. Each new missing person report involving a young woman in rural West Virginia was compared against Maren's disappearance. But none provided the connection he needed. Over time, Bellamy became convinced that the failure of the first investigation had not come only from weather, poor evidence handling, or limited technology. Someone had interfered with the search from inside the community. The missing yellow note remained central to that belief. Years later, while reviewing photographs from the command post on County Route 12, Bellamy noticed a familiar face near the open trunk of the state police cruiser. The man was Hollis Varden, one of the most trusted volunteers in Alder Creek. Hollis had organized food deliveries for search teams, helped coordinate civilian volunteers, and spoken publicly about supporting Gideon and Lenora Holloway. He had been close enough to officers that no one questioned his presence near the evidence. At the time, the photograph had seemed unimportant. Hollis was one of many local residents helping with the search. In retrospect, his position beside the cruiser placed him within reach of the box containing the yellow note. Bellamy searched the original records for Hollis's name. Hollis had given a brief statement in 2005 and claimed that he spent the afternoon and evening of September 6 working at a manufacturing plant. The statement had been accepted without a complete review of the plant's access records. Nothing in the file showed that investigators had examined his family connections or properties associated with his older brother, Bram Varden. Bellamy could not reopen the case on suspicion alone. The photograph showed opportunity, not proof. Hollis had not been identified by any witness, and the missing note no longer existed for forensic testing. Without new evidence, the case remained inactive. Bellamy eventually retired from full-time law enforcement, but he continued assisting with cold cases as a consultant. Maren's file followed him into retirement. He believed the answer still existed somewhere in the records, hidden beneath the assumptions made during the first days of the investigation. In September 2024, 19 years after Maren disappeared, Tobin Rusk was living in Columbus, Ohio. He was 30 years old and worked as a firefighter. The interest Maren had noticed during his first day in room 14 had remained with him. Over the years, the memory of a teacher treating his curiosity as something valuable had become part of the reason he entered emergency service. Tobin had never forgotten Maren's disappearance. Each year, local news reports repeated the basic facts, but the case gradually became part of Alder Creek's history. Tobin remembered more than the reports contained. He remembered her voice, her patience, and the nervous movement of her left thumb against her index finger. That month, severe flooding affected several communities in southern Ohio. Tobin watched a televised report about relief operations while waiting to begin a shift. The broadcast included volunteers distributing food, blankets, and bottled water at a temporary assistance center. One volunteer was identified as Wren Miller. Tobin first noticed her because of her age. The woman appeared to be in her early 40s, close to the age Maren would have been. Her hair and face had changed, and the years had left no simple resemblance to the young teacher in the missing person photographs. Then the woman rubbed her left thumb against the side of her index finger. The movement lasted only a moment, but Tobin recognized it immediately. He replayed the report several times and captured an image from the broadcast. He compared it with the photograph of Maren that had remained online through the state's missing person database. The resemblance was not exact, but certain features were consistent. Tobin contacted law enforcement in Ohio and then reached out to authorities in West Virginia. His report was initially treated as another possible sighting. During the previous 19 years, hundreds of people had claimed to see Maren in stores, airports, churches, and hospitals. None had been confirmed. Bellamy was contacted because he still served as a consultant on the case. When he viewed the footage, he did not rely on the nervous habit alone. He compared the woman's age, facial structure, and visible physical features with Maren's records. He also reviewed the name Wren Miller and found that her documented history began years after Maren's disappearance. There was no reliable childhood record, no clear school history, and no consistent family information connected to Wren Miller. Ohio authorities located her through the relief organization. She lived quietly, worked temporary jobs, and had little contact with people who knew her well. When approached by investigators, she denied being Maren Holloway. She said her name was Wren Miller. She did not recognize Gideon or Lenora when shown recent photographs. She denied growing up in West Virginia and insisted that she had never taught at Alder Creek Middle School. When officers mentioned room 14, her fear became immediate, but she continued rejecting the name Maren. Investigators obtained a DNA sample with her consent. It was compared with samples provided by Gideon and Lenora years earlier. The laboratory result confirmed that Wren Miller was their biological daughter. After 19 years, Maren Holloway had been found alive. The discovery did not produce the reunion her parents had imagined. Maren refused to accept the test result and became distressed whenever investigators challenged the identity she had used for years. She believed acknowledging her real name would place someone else in danger. Bellamy recognized that the case had entered a new stage. Finding Maren had answered where she was, but not what had been done to her. The woman in Ohio was no longer physically locked inside a room. Yet every response showed that the people who had taken her still controlled what she believed, what she remembered, and what she feared would happen if she tried to return home. Maren was moved to a secure residence in Ohio where access was limited to investigators, medical staff, and trauma specialists. The decision was made to protect her from public attention and from anyone who might still be connected to her disappearance. News of the DNA confirmation had not yet been released, and authorities wanted time to understand why she rejected her identity despite the scientific evidence. The woman who called herself Wren Miller appeared able to function in ordinary situations. She answered basic questions, followed routines, and spoke calmly about her work and the places she had lived. The confusion began whenever investigators mentioned West Virginia, Gideon and Lenora Holloway, or Alder Creek Middle School. She insisted that those details belonged to someone else. The trauma team advised against forcing her to accept the name Maren. 19 years of control could not be undone through confrontation. Her false identity had not simply been given to her. It had become the structure she used to survive. Investigators began by documenting her daily behavior. They noticed that her anxiety increased every afternoon. At approximately 4 o'clock, she became watchful and repeatedly checked doors and windows. She avoided making telephone calls and refused to leave the residence during that period. The pattern was too consistent to be accidental. When asked what she expected to happen, Maren could not provide a complete answer. She believed someone might arrive if she broke certain rules. She also believed another woman could be harmed if she spoke about her past. The fear was connected to a promise she had been forced to keep. Bellamy reviewed the few possessions brought from Maren's Ohio apartment. Most were ordinary household items and second-hand clothing. She owned little that connected her to a permanent life. There were no family photographs, school records, or personal documents from childhood. One item drew attention. It was an old canvas travel bag with a repaired inner lining. Maren became distressed when investigators asked to examine it, but she eventually agreed after the trauma specialist explained that nothing would be removed without being documented. Inside the lining, investigators found 19 Christmas cards. Each card was simple and unsigned. None contained a return address. The same message appeared inside every one. Good girls keep promises. The cards covered 19 years, one for every Christmas since Maren disappeared. They had not been displayed or thrown away. Maren had hidden them where no visitor would see them, yet she had kept every card. To investigators, they represented a continuing threat. The cards were sent for forensic examination. Printing experts determined that they came from the same original production batch. The paper, ink, and cutting pattern were consistent across all 19. Whoever ordered them had planned years of communication in advance. Bellamy searched regional printing businesses that had operated in 2005. Most had closed, changed ownership, or destroyed old records. One former shop owner, Silas Danner, still lived in Somersville. At 71, he had retired years earlier but kept several boxes of customer invoices and sample orders in storage. Silas recognized the cards. He remembered the order because it was unusual. A man had requested a small private batch with no holiday image, no business name, and the same sentence printed inside every card. He paid in cash and asked that the cards be packed together rather than mailed. Silas identified that customer as Hollis Varden. The identification connected Hollis directly to Maren's life after her disappearance. His presence near the police evidence box in 2005 could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. He had access to the yellow note when it vanished, and he had ordered the cards used to control Maren for 19 years. The new evidence also clarified the structure of the crime. Hollis had not been the large man described in the original roadside reconstruction or the physical type remembered by Sloan Mercer. Investigators believed another offender had carried out the abductions and maintained the primary confinement. Hollis was the accomplice. His role appeared to involve protecting the main offender, interfering with the investigation, and preserving Maren's fear after the physical captivity changed. He had built his reputation around service while using that trust to stay close to the case. Bellamy returned to the early files and examined every statement Hollis had given. One detail became more important than the rest. Hollis had claimed he was working at the manufacturing plant throughout the evening of September 6, 2005. The original investigators had confirmed only that he was scheduled to work. They had not obtained the plant's complete gate log. Bellamy requested archived records from the company. The current management found that older security documents had been transferred during a system update rather than destroyed. Among them was the handwritten gate record from the day Maren disappeared. The log showed that Hollis left the plant at 4:30 p.m. He returned at 6:35. His explanation at the time was an emergency dental appointment, but no dental office had ever confirmed it. The missing 2 hours placed him away from work during the period when Maren left Alder Creek Middle School and encountered the vehicles on County Route 12. The cards established that Hollis knew where Maren was. The photograph placed him beside the stolen evidence. The gate log destroyed the alibi that had protected him for 19 years. Bellamy now had enough to move beyond suspicion. The investigation turned toward Hollis's family, especially his older brother, Bram Varden. Bram had a history of violence, access to isolated property, and the physical build that matched the man involved in the roadside trap. For the first time since Maren was found alive, investigators could see not only how she had been controlled, but who had helped keep the truth hidden. Investigators began with Bram Varden's history. He was older than Hollis, physically larger, and had accumulated complaints involving threats, assault, and controlling behavior. None had resulted in a conviction serious enough to keep him under long-term supervision. He had spent much of his adult life moving between temporary jobs and rural properties owned through relatives. The most important property was a 60-acre tract in Pocahontas County. Bram had purchased it before Maren disappeared and rarely allowed visitors. County records showed a small house, several outbuildings, and no major improvements listed after the original sale. Bram could not be questioned. He had died from a heart attack in November 2018. That date immediately drew Bellamy's attention. Maren's life under the name Wren Miller became more stable only after 2018. Before then, the few records connected to her false identity showed irregular employment and frequent moves. After Bram's death, she remained in Ohio and began appearing in community volunteer programs. Investigators believed Bram had been the primary captor and Hollis had taken responsibility for controlling Maren after his brother died. A search warrant was obtained for the Pocahontas County property. Federal agents, state police, and forensic specialists entered the land together. The house contained little that directly connected Bram to Maren. Most documents had been discarded after his death, and the personal belongings that remained were ordinary. The outbuildings were examined more carefully. One structure appeared to have been altered without permits. Its outer walls matched the age of the property, but part of the floor had been reinforced with newer concrete. Electrical lines ran toward an area that did not appear on the county plans. Investigators removed shelving and found a concealed access point leading below ground. Behind it was a cinder block room secured by a steel door. The room contained a narrow bed, a chemical toilet, storage shelves, and a small barred window positioned too high for a person to reach easily. There were no chains or permanent restraints. The design relied on the locked door, isolation, and the captor's control over food and information. The walls had been decorated to resemble a classroom. Faded paper apples had been attached above a damaged board. Old educational posters covered parts of the concrete. Used schoolbooks were arranged on one shelf. The materials were not exact copies of Room 14, but the purpose was clear. Bram had recreated pieces of the place Maren knew before her disappearance. Bellamy understood that the room had been designed to confuse comfort with captivity. Bram had taken familiar objects from Maren's first day as a teacher and turned them into reminders that her former life was no longer available to her. Forensic teams documented every item before removal. Several books carried handwritten notes in the margins. Most were brief observations about dates, meals, and sounds outside the room. The handwriting matched samples from Maren's employment records. A composition notebook was found beneath the bed frame. The early pages contained attempts to record time. Maren had written days of the week and marked changes in weather she could not see clearly. Later pages became less organized. Some sentences appeared repeatedly, written with different pressure and spacing. One line appeared more often than the others. "If I leave, someone else will be brought here." The sentence explained why physical restraints had not been necessary for the entire captivity. Bram had convinced Maren that her escape would cause another woman to be abducted. He had chosen a threat built around the same compassion that caused her to stop for the girl in the yellow raincoat. Maren's instinct to protect vulnerable people became the method used to imprison her. The notebook also helped investigators understand Sloan Mercer's abduction. Bram had attempted to prove that his threat was real. When Sloan was taken in January 2006, Maren would have known that another woman had been brought into the system. Sloan's eventual escape did not free Maren. It may have strengthened the belief that Bram was willing to replace her or punish disobedience with another victim. No evidence showed that Sloan had been held in the same underground room. Investigators believed Bram had access to more than one location, including temporary properties such as the abandoned dairy farm. The children Sloan heard at 10:30 each weekday supported the possibility that she had been kept elsewhere. The room on Bram's property had been Maren's prison. Forensic examination revealed traces of her DNA on the bed frame, books, and interior door. The evidence confirmed that she had lived there for an extended period. It also established that Bram's property was directly connected to the kidnapping. Hollis's involvement was visible throughout the structure. Receipts recovered from old financial records showed purchases of cleaning supplies, canned food, batteries, and school materials. Several transactions had been made in Hollis's name. None was enough by itself to prove what he knew, but together they showed years of assistance. Investigators also found maintenance items purchased shortly before Bram's death. That timing suggested Hollis had continued supporting the hidden room until 2018. Bellamy compared the notebook with the 19 Christmas cards. The sentence in the notebook had controlled Maren during physical captivity. The words inside the cards had preserved the same obedience after she was moved to Ohio. Bram created the threat. Hollis kept it alive. The search transformed the case. Authorities no longer had only a confirmed victim and a suspected accomplice. They had the room where Maren had been held, her handwriting documenting the coercion, and financial records connecting Hollis to the confinement. For 19 years, Hollis had depended on Bram's death, Maren's silence, and the community's trust. The room beneath the outbuilding destroyed all three protections. By the time investigators left the property, Bellamy knew the next step would not be another search. It would be Hollis Varden's arrest. Hollis Varden was arrested before news of the search at Bram's property became public. Investigators wanted to prevent him from destroying records, contacting anyone connected to Maren's false identity, or preparing a story around Bram's death. He was taken to a state police facility and informed that the case involved kidnapping, obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, and interstate crimes. Hollis requested an attorney but agreed to answer basic questions while the legal process began. At first, he relied on the same reputation that had protected him for 19 years. He described himself as a volunteer who had helped the Holloway family, supported search teams, and remained available whenever investigators asked for information. He claimed that his connection to Maren's disappearance came only from his work in the community. Bellamy presented the evidence without arguing. The first item was the photograph taken near the command post on September 7, 2005. Hollis stood beside the open trunk of the police cruiser where the evidence box had been stored. The second item was the manufacturing plant gate log showing that he left work at 4:30 p.m. on the day Maren disappeared and returned at 6:35. The supposed emergency dental appointment had never been verified. Next came the records from Silas Danner's print shop. They showed that Hollis had ordered the batch of Christmas cards carrying the message "Good girls keep promises." The cards had been used to maintain Maren's fear every year after her disappearance. The final evidence came from Bram's property. Maren's DNA had been recovered from the underground room. Her notebook documented the threat used to control her, and financial records showed purchases made in Hollis's name for supplies connected to the room. Hollis continued denying that he had participated in the kidnapping. He admitted buying supplies for Bram but claimed he did not know why his brother wanted them. He said the Christmas cards were only a private favor and that he had never understood their meaning. That explanation ended when investigators showed him the records of Maren's life in Ohio. The false identity became active only after Bram's death in November 2018. Hollis's contact with the printing shop, the annual cards, and the lack of any family history for Wren Miller established a pattern that could not be explained as coincidence. Hollis then tried to separate himself from Bram. He described his older brother as violent, unpredictable, and capable of frightening anyone who challenged him. He claimed that Bram had designed the roadside trap and selected Maren after seeing how she responded to children. The girl in the yellow raincoat had been used to bring a compassionate driver to a stop. Hollis admitted that he drove the second vehicle. He had followed Bram to County Route 12 and blocked Maren's sedan when she tried to leave. He understood what was happening before the abduction was complete. He had enough time to drive away or contact police, but he chose to help his brother. After Bram took Maren to the Pocahontas County property, Hollis knew where she was being held. He visited the property, delivered supplies, and helped maintain the room. He also understood that Bram was controlling her through the threat that another woman would be taken if she escaped. Hollis admitted that Sloane Mercer's abduction had been used to make that threat believable. He did not claim responsibility for holding Sloane, but he knew Bram had taken another woman. He also knew she escaped. Hollis told no one. When Maren's sedan was found, Hollis joined the search because it allowed him to learn what police had discovered. The yellow note created the greatest danger. He recognized that the letters and numbers could lead investigators to a vehicle connected to Bram. Hollis removed the paper from the evidence bag while officers and volunteers were moving around the cruiser. He left the empty bag in place because he hoped the loss would be blamed on poor handling. For years, he protected Bram by directing attention away from the property. He joined community efforts, spoke with the Holloways, and maintained the appearance of concern. The more people trusted him, the less likely they were to question his access to the search. Bram's death in November 2018 forced Hollis to decide what to do with Maren. He could have released her and told the truth. Instead, he moved her to Ohio under the name Wren Miller. Hollis admitted that he told Maren Bram was still alive. He warned her that contacting her parents or law enforcement would cause another woman to be taken. The annual cards reinforced the same belief. Their purpose was not communication. They were reminders that the threat continued. Hollis claimed that he had given Maren freedom by moving her out of the underground room. Investigators rejected that argument. She had been placed in another state without her identity, family, or history. She remained controlled by fear and by the belief that someone else's safety depended on her silence. The confession provided the full connection between the roadside trap, the stolen evidence, the underground room, and the false life in Ohio. It also established that Hollis's role had not ended after the kidnapping. He had participated in the crime for 19 years. Federal prosecutors charged him with conspiracy to kidnap, interstate transportation connected to unlawful confinement, obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, identity fraud, and continued assistance in Maren's captivity. Hollis eventually entered a guilty plea after his attorneys reviewed the strength of the evidence. During sentencing, prosecutors emphasized that Bram's violence did not excuse Hollis's choices. He had been given repeated opportunities to help Maren and had rejected everyone. The court imposed a sentence that ensured he would spend the remainder of his life in federal prison. For Gideon and Lenora Holloway, the conviction ended the legal uncertainty that had followed them since 2005. The men responsible had been identified, the hidden room had been found, and the evidence that vanished from the first investigation had finally been explained. For Maren, the conviction meant something more difficult to accept. The threat no longer existed. Bram was dead. Hollis could not reach her. No other woman would be taken because she spoke her real name. For 19 years, fear had told her that silence was an act of protection. Now the truth showed that silence had protected only the men who had taken her. Maren's return to West Virginia was handled privately. Gideon and Lenora Holloway had waited 19 years for the chance to see their daughter again, but they were warned that reunion would not erase what had happened to her. Maren remembered them, yet memory and trust did not return at the same speed. She recognized their names, their voices, and details from childhood, but she still feared that accepting them would place someone else in danger. Her parents did not ask for explanations. They did not question why she had not escaped or why she had lived as Wren Miller for so long. They understood that those questions treated captivity as though it had been a choice. They welcomed the woman Maren had become. The family home had changed with time, but Gideon and Lenora had never removed the parts of Maren's life that mattered most to them. Her photographs remained in albums, her college records were still stored in a cabinet, and the porch light had been left on every night since her disappearance. The light had once represented their refusal to give up. After Maren returned, it became part of an ordinary home again. Recovery did not follow a simple path. Maren continued working with trauma specialists and sometimes asked to be called Wren because that name still felt safer. At other times, she used Maren without hesitation. No one forced her to choose between the two identities before she was ready. She learned that freedom was different from safety. A door could remain unlocked while fear still prevented her from leaving. A telephone could be available while she remained afraid to call anyone. Bram and Hollis were gone from her life, but their rules survived inside the habits they had created. Her parents learned not to measure recovery by the absence of fear. They measured it by smaller changes. Maren began choosing her own meals. She stopped asking permission before opening a window. She made decisions without explaining why they were safe for other people. Tobin Rusk visited after Maren agreed to see him. He was no longer the quiet 11-year-old who had sat in room 14. He was a firefighter in Columbus, a profession connected to the future Maren had noticed during her first day of teaching. Tobin did not expect her to remember him immediately. He explained who he had been and why the brief attention she gave him had mattered. Maren had treated his interest in emergency work as something valuable rather than childish. That small act had stayed with him long after she disappeared. Maren learned that her first day as a teacher had not ended when she was taken. The students from room 14 had carried parts of that day into adulthood. Some remembered the red paper apples. Others remembered the way she listened to answers without humiliating anyone who was wrong. Tobin remembered that she saw a future in him before he could see one for himself. Several months after her return, Maren asked to visit Alder Creek Middle School. The district arranged a private visit after classes had ended. The building had been updated, but room 14 still existed. The chalkboard had been replaced, and the desks were different. Technology had changed the way students worked, and most of the materials from 2005 were gone. Yet the room remained recognizable enough to bring back memories that did not belong to Bram's imitation. For years, the underground room had forced Maren to associate classrooms with confinement. Bram had copied the paper decorations and schoolbooks because he wanted her old life to become part of the punishment. Standing in the real room 14 allowed her to separate the two places. The classroom had not betrayed her. Teaching had not caused her suffering. The compassion that made her stop for the girl in the yellow raincoat had been exploited, but compassion itself had not been wrong. Maren did not return to full-time teaching. The schedule, noise, and responsibility of a classroom were more than she was ready to carry. Instead, she began volunteering at the public library in Alder Creek. She worked with children who needed help with reading and homework. Many came from families facing the same pressures she had understood in 2005. Some believed they were not smart enough. Others had learned to remain quiet so adults would not notice their struggles. Maren noticed them. She worked with small groups and left when the work became emotionally difficult. The library did not require her to prove that she had recovered. It gave her a place where she could contribute without surrendering control of her own life. Gideon and Lenora watched their daughter build a future that was not the one she had planned at 24. The lost years could not be returned. No conviction could restore them, and no reunion could make the family exactly what it had been before September 6, 2005. But loss was no longer the only truth in their home. Maren had survived. Tobin had remembered. Bellamy had continued looking. Her parents had kept the porch light burning when there was no evidence that she would ever see it again. The people who imprisoned Maren believed fear could erase her identity. They believed isolation could make her disappear even while she remained alive. They were wrong. Fear can remain long after a locked door opens, and freedom does not always arrive at the moment of rescue. Sometimes it returns slowly, through a familiar name, a patient family, a remembered classroom, or a child who needs someone to believe in them. Maren could not recover the life that had been stolen. She could only decide what to do with the life that remained. In the library, she gave children the same gift she had given Tobin on her first day in room 14. The belief that their future was still larger than what had happened to them. That became the meaning of her return. A person is not defined only by the years taken away, but also by the kindness they are still able to give after finding the way home. Thank you sincerely for taking the time to listen to today's story. Your attention, patience, and support mean more to us than words can fully express. Stories like this remind us that even when fear, loss, and injustice seem overwhelming, Hope can survive in the hearts of those who refuse to give up. Maren's journey teaches us that freedom is not always restored the moment a door opens. Sometimes the deepest prisons are built from fear, guilt, and the belief that we must sacrifice ourselves to protect others. Her story also reminds us that kindness is never wasted. A single act of encouragement can remain in someone's heart for years and may one day become the light that leads another person back home. We can also learn from the patience of her family, the determination of those who continued searching, and the courage of people who chose not to forget. Truth may be delayed, but it still matters. Compassion may be exploited, but that does not make compassion a weakness. What truly defines a person is not only what they have endured, but also the goodness they are still willing to share afterward. To support our channel, you only need to press the like button, leave your thoughts and feelings in the comments below, and subscribe to the channel. Every like, comment, and subscription helps us continue bringing meaningful stories to more listeners. Thank you once again for being here with us today. We hope this story stays in your heart and reminds you to value kindness, family, truth, and the precious freedom of every human life.